Good morning. We're going to do a quick little video documentation of the installation and then going a bit over the project of itself, and then a little bit of next steps of what could be done further into the project if it was to continue. So to start ourselves off, we're just going to go over to code, get the URL, go to our Visual Studios or ID of choice, and then you just do git clone and then the URL, and then that should get you your URL there, and then already you can see the back end and the front end. So now it's pretty much just a case of following the steps on the README, setting up the environment so that this doesn't mess with any of your other files that you have. All right, now we're going to go through some of the actual requirements for this program. So the program itself allows uploading. So I'm going to upload the files that I was given. And you can see here, it shows 5 actual boxes in the preview, and you can scroll along and see all of the data inside the preview itself, and you can see this for both. You can also see as you entered the actual files, the progress bar was going up, which is going to be a part of the later validation. But right now it's just showing the 5 rows, 5 rows of per file. Now I'm going to show the functionality to modify data before importing, which is going to be here. Click edit, and now you have this pop-up, and you can modify the data as you want. So if you want to change this to 1, then you can change that to 1, and I'm going to leave all the rest of the data the same because I don't really want to mess with it too much. And then you click confirm, one more modified, and you save and close. And you should be able to see the changes has been updated here. You can actually see that you can't upload anything before you've done all the steps, which blocks any import validation. You can't go without portfolio name or both files. So next we're going to go into actually uploading the portfolio itself. And the portfolio name only has to be a string before it's valid. If it's not a string, then of course it doesn't work, it just sets it back. Okay, so let's go with portfolio 3 and submit, and portfolio 3 has been submitted successfully. So we can actually see if this is working or not by going to this URL, which just shows the what's actually in portfolios. And you can see it's just CSV data that's been turned into readable text file, which is what's been sent to the backend. And then if you wanted, then you can convert this back into a CSV file. But for the requirements of himself, it was sending a CSV file, and you've sent this CSV file to the backend. Now we're going to show the basic client-side validation, and that's handled all here. When you upload a file, it runs a validation against itself to make sure that the file of itself is what it's supposed to be. And you can see that here. Over here, we're just going to upload it. All right, so here we can see that the validation is actually working, and it's detecting that there's errors in this file. And you can see that the error is that this shouldn't be empty. So we're going to change that to test. and save the change and confirm the change save. And then we're going to go here, and then we're going to change this to test3. So these are basic validation checks that I'm doing here. All it's doing is saying this needs to be a valid number. So as long as this is a number, then that's going to set that up for that. And because that was the requirement that was set, this needs to be this specific type. Confirm, and then this needs to be any string, and this needs to be any number. And then this needs to be less than 50. I mean less than 100. So 10. And let's say confirm, and then this needs to be so less than 100. Just wait and confirm, and then this needs to be 7. Well, not that it needs to be, but it needs to be a number, which it says yeah. But this needs to be empty. Yeah, you see, it needs to be a valid number. Okay. And then that's done. You save that, and then you see now that all the errors have been corrected, it runs a valid validation check at any time you press close. Whenever you upload a new file, or whenever you edit, like you do an edit of itself. So now it's 2 of 3, and then if I enter port 4, then it will submit, and it submits successfully. You cannot submit beforehand, the button's not pressable, so that meets that as well. And it shows the submitted successfully, which meets that criteria as well. So we can see test 3 is 30 here, and we're just gonna check that test 3 has 30 here as well. You can see that. So the app does edit the file of itself, and then it sends it over to the backend. Some extra things this project does is it has the capability to handle multiple files, which is, I know, is one of the follow-up questions, how you manage like 20 files. So this is how my program would be able to handle that. It basically stores a whole bunch of them, and then does like a scrolling bar between all of the files that you have. So you can see that there, and it, you can still see all of the files that you actually do have. Another thing is the how would you handle numerous validation errors, which is what I kind of showed when the program was actually broken, and you could see all of the errors that were inside each file, and I'll go over a bit of that logic in the next section. So now I'm going to go quickly over one of the more important parts of the code, which is the validation. And how I handle validation is basically I've taken all of the headers that I know are going to be in the program, and then I, using the requirements, set up if they are a string, or in the CSV files that I already have, the example CSV files I already have from the test, I can know if they're going to be a string, or if they're going to be a float, or if they're going to be one of the special strings that are below, or if they're like one of these optional columns that I found didn't have any data in them at all. And it basically allows me to set up a rule for all of them to follow, which then gets used in a function called validate cell later, just to validate what the error is, so it knows what to show against each cell in the edit section. It's pretty simple what validate cell does. It just checks against, as I said, it just checks against the current header that's being put inside of validate cell, because it goes cell by cell for each cell in the actual CSV file, and checks if the header meets one of the set of headers, and it's better to do a set here because it's allows it to do a quick lookup of any other type. So if you did an array, you couldn't do as quick of a lookup. So it's just, a bit of efficiency. But this just checks against all of the set of rules. And then if it is a part of that, it will find out if that value, like next to the header, has a meets the requirements, and if it doesn't meet the requirements, then it will return the error that's associated with it. Okay. So validate file is what uses validate cell to basically, it just iterates through the whole file of itself, and you can see that here it goes for row index when it's 1, because you're skipping the first row, because the first row is going to be the headers of themselves, so you don't want to include the headers because you already know what the headers are. And use the data length and the headers length because we already know how many headers there are going to be. And it just, all this is doing is going just row by row through the columns and checking the validate cell against each of the cells of themselves, checking what the cell is and if it meets the requirement that it's supposed to meet, considering what its header is. And this last part, if there is an error, it will store the error as errors, and it will have that for the file, it will have that for the row, and just the general count of how many errors are actually there itself. So for the validation, we also wrote some tests because it's the most critical part of the code, really, to make sure that everything is running. So I've written some tests. These are some basic tests, and it's kind of just like what I did earlier in terms of just having different strings or lack of strings in certain areas that are not supposed to have it, or numbers in areas that are not supposed to have it, or not having this specific string. And you can see it passes the test. Basically, it just shows that the validation of itself is working as intended, and if ever this was not to pass its tests, and it's not working as it's supposed to. So a final overview is, I'm just going to say like some next steps that I could potentially take, to just make this project better. So one of the things is, for the project of itself, you can enter whatever files you really want into any of these sections. And there wasn't really any requirement to say that you need to recognize what file is being uploaded. And a way you could do that is using the headers. If we know that all of the headers are required and there's not going to be any extra headers, then you could know that even if you do upload it into the wrong files, you could know that a location file is going to be a location file because there's longitude and latitude. And then the count file is going to be a count file because it has its own specific files as well. Another one is my program specifically, you can repeat the files that you import because the requirement wasn't considering that you could even import multiple files anyway, really. It was just something I did to meet one of those the further talking points. Portfolio name as well is another part. I'm not sure what a portfolio name is going to look like, so maybe if a portfolio name needs a specific amount of characters that are used, maybe it can't use a certain amount of characters, maybe it has to have a special character like an underscore, or maybe it has like numbers in it, or maybe it shouldn't have numbers in it. And the last thing would be just more validation against what certain data entry, like data forms, are gonna actually have to be. So do they have to be like a float? Do they have to be a certain amount of characters? Do they have to have do they have to meet like certain standards and like all kinds of stuff like that? Anyway, I think that covers pretty much everything that I wanted to cover in the project of itself, and just this quick video documentation of my project and all the things that I can do and how it meets all of the requirements that were set.